For about 20 years, ambition in Indian tech had a fixed direction. You studied hard, you cracked the exam, you landed the job. And if you were really good, you left. The destination was almost always the same, a flight west, usually somewhere within driving distance of San Francisco. That was the shape of success. It pointed one way. This year, for the first time, that arrow looks like it's turning around. And the interesting part isn't that people are coming back. It's that nobody can fully agree on whether they're being pulled home or pushed out.
You're listening to Nelson John 360. Nelson John 360.
Hey friends, welcome back to Nelson John 360. I'm Nelson John. Alright, so you heard the intro. Sit with that picture for a second, because it's genuinely new. For most of the last 2 decades, the movement of Indian tech talent was a one-way street. People left, some came back eventually, sure, but the dominant flow, the thing that defined careers, family dinners, the whole idea of making it, was outbound. That plane to the west was the milestone. And what's showing up in the data now is the early shape of a reversal. I'm not talking about a trickle here and there, which has always existed, but a measurable year-on-year climb in the number of engineers packing up and moving back to India. Now, here are the numbers, because, they're the spin of this whole story. Staffing specialists who track this corridor, the talent movement between India and the US, say the number of tech professionals returning to India was around 9,800 in 2024. The next year, 2025, it jumped to about 15,100. And this year, 2026, the year-to-date figure has already touched 7,300. And now we're in June. And we're not even at the halfway mark of the working year when you account for the lag in this kind of data. The people who watch this closely are now saying something they wouldn't have said, say, about a few years ago. That the numbers of returnees this year could actually overtake the number of people leaving. Let that land. The return flight might be, for the first time, be busier than the departure. Now, the obvious reaction is to call this a victory. India winning, talent coming home to build. And there is real truth in that. There is merit to that. We'll get to that. But if you stop at the cheerful headline, you're missing what's actually happening. Because this is a story of, let's say, 2 engines, and they're pushing in the same direction for very different reasons. One engine is what's pulling people toward India. The other one is what's pushing them out of America. And honestly, telling those 2 parts, figuring out how much is hope and how much is escape, is the most interesting thing in this entire episode. Let me start with the push, because it's the one thing, that's been in the headlines. The big one is H-1B visa, the work visa that for years was the golden ticket for Indian engineers. And to understand why it has been such a source of anxiety lately, you need one statistic. In fiscal year 2024, Indian nationals received around 283,000 H-1B visas. Yes, that's roughly 71% of all of them. So when anything happens to that visa program, it doesn't hit foreign workers in some abstract sense. It hits Indians, specifically and overwhelmingly. And a lot has been happening to it. The flashpoint was a proposed fee, $100,000 attached to H-1B applications. $100,000 for a program that an entire generation of Indian engineers had treated as the natural next step. That number wasn't just a cost. It was a message. It said the door you've been walking through for 20 years is not guaranteed to stay open, and it may get a lot more expensive to use. Now, the legal story has since moved. A federal court struck that fee down, ruling it was unlawfully imposed. So, in the narrow, technical sense, that threat is erased. But here's the thing about anxiety. A court can reverse a fee. It cannot reverse the feeling. The scramble already happened. People had already started doing the math on whether America was still a safe long-term bet. And once you've asked yourself that question, seriously, you don't fully unask it. Layer on top of that, a tech job market in the US that's been cooler than the boom years. Slower hiring, a wave of layoffs across the industry, and for someone on a work visa, a layoff isn't just a setback. It can start a clock, lose the job, and you may have a narrow window to find another sponsor or leave. That's a different kind of pressure than what a citizen would feel. It turns a career wobble into a question about which country you'll be living in. So when you add it all up, visa uncertainty, a hefty proposed price tag on the dream, a tighter job market, and the constant low hum of what if, you get a lot of very talented people quietly deciding the risk isn't worth it anymore. Let me push that. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because if it were only the push, this would be a sad story. Talented people retreating, going home because they ran out of options. And that's not the whole picture, not even close. Because while America got harder, India got a lot more attractive. And the single biggest reason has a slightly clunky name: Global Capability Centers. GCCs, I'm sure you've heard about it. And if you haven't heard about it, let me explain what those are without the jargon, because they matter enormously. For years, when a big global company set up shop here in India, the mental model was the call center or the back office. The cheap room where unglamorous work got done while the real decisions happened elsewhere. A global capability center is the evolution of that idea, and it has flipped almost entirely. These are now serious centers where global companies run their actual engineering, their product design, their AI work, their core strategy out of India, not the back office. Increasingly, it's the engine room, and the scale is the part people underestimate. These centers already employ something like 1.9 million professionals in India, and there are well over 1,800 of them. And the forecasts have that workforce climbing toward 3.5 million by the end of the decade. When you put that in plain terms, the GCC sector now employs more than India's entire commercial banking industry and tends to pay better than traditional IT services. And a huge slice of this is happening in one city, Bangalore. The place that for years carried that slightly dismissive label, the outsourcing capital, the world's back office, is now home to roughly half of India's AI and machine learning talent. The work being done in Bangalore is no longer the leftovers. In a lot of cases, it's the frontier. So picture the choice in front of an Indian engineer today. A few years ago, doing cutting-edge work at a top global company more or less required a plane ticket and a visa. Now, a lot of that exact same work for a lot of those exact same companies is available a metro ride away from where they grew up. Without the visa lottery, without being 8,000 miles away from aging parents, without raising kids who only meet their grandparents once a year, when that gap between there and here shrinks that much, the math of living changes completely. And that's the real story underneath the numbers. It's not really about a flight manifest. It's about a choice that didn't exist before. To see how big that shift is, it helps to remember how things felt not so long ago. There is a venture capitalist named Hemant Mahapatra. He left India, worked at Google and at one of the most famous investment firms in Silicon Valley. And then he came back. He tells a story about how, in an earlier era in Bangalore, being an entrepreneur was basically synonymous with being unemployed. There was a stigma to it. Well, half joking. He said that back then, if you called yourself a founder, you couldn't get married. Nobody wanted to set you up. The thing about the distance between that and today, where founding a company in Bangalore is one of the most aspirational things a young Indian can do. Or take Vani Kola, she spent over 2 decades in Silicon Valley, co-founded companies there and had real success. And then she chose to come back to India in 2006, well before this was a trend. Since then, she has become one of the most influential investors in the country. People like her were the exception, the pioneers who returned when the ecosystem barely existed and had to help build the very thing that's now pulling the next generation back home. What's different in 2026 is that you no longer have to be a pioneer to make that choice. The path is paved, the funding is here, the companies are here, the global standard work is here. Coming back used to be a leap of faith. Now it's just one reasonable option on the menu that finally has more than one item on it. And that, the existence of a real choice, is the thing worth celebrating, much more than any single number. Because for the longest time, the Indian tech story had a quiet sadness folded into it. We trained some of the best engineering minds on the planet, and then we watched a huge share of them build their best work and their lives somewhere else. The phrase people used was brain drain. What's happening now isn't the opposite. It's not a brain gain where everyone is rushing back. It's something healthier and more grown-up, mature than that. It's a two-way door, you see. Talent can leave and come back, move toward opportunity in either direction. And India is now a place worth moving toward, not just away from. Let me be straight with you, because this show isn't here to sell you a fairy tale. There are catches, caveats. India's own job market, hasn't suddenly become a paradise. In fact, by one measure, active job demand recently hit a 28-month low, with open roles down around 17% compared to a year earlier. So, returnees aren't walking into a hiring boom. Some are coming back to a market that's genuinely competitive and, in places, soft. And the salary, that looked enormous in dollars, often shrinks in rupees, even after you account for the lower cost of living. And the infrastructure can be exhausting. Anyone who sat in Bangalore traffic on a bad day knows the city's ambitions and its roads are not on the same timeline. And here's a quieter cost nobody puts on a spreadsheet. The kids who now have to make new friends. The spouse who left a career behind, the version of your life in the other country that you'll always wonder about. So this isn't a clean win, it's a trade. And the people making it thoughtfully aren't doing it because India became perfect. They're doing it because for the first time, the things they'd be giving up by coming back home, the career, the cutting edge work, the global exposure, they can increasingly get on this side of the ocean too. So what do you actually take from all of this? A few things. If you're an Indian professional abroad, quietly running the numbers on whether to come back, the honest take is that this is no longer a fringe romantic decision you make against the grain. The grain has shifted. The ecosystem you'd be returning to is real. It's well-funded, and the gap between the work you can do there and the work you can do from here has narrowed more than, probably what you realize. But go in with clear eyes. Look at the actual market, not the headline. Talk to people who made the move in the last year, not 5 years ago, because, the texture changes fast. And weigh the unglamorous costs honestly, because those are the ones that decide whether you're happy 2 years in. And if you're watching this from outside, as someone who just cares about where India is heading, here's the biggest signal. The most valuable thing a country can build isn't a policy or a subsidy. It's a reason for its most ambitious people to choose it. For a long time, India produced extraordinary talent and then exported it. Now, what's changing isn't that the talent stopped being good. It's that finally staying or coming back is a credible way to win. That's not a small thing, I would say. That might be the most important number in this whole episode. And it's one nobody can put a chart. The number of brilliant people who now believe their best work can happen right here. That's the corridor flipped. Thanks for spending your time with me here on the Nelson John 360 podcast. Let me know your thoughts on this episode, whether you agree, disagree, let me know. I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram. That's Nelson John 360. Until then, stay informed. I'll catch you in the next one.